All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this evening's event. My name is Nick, and I'm one of the events hosts here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. If you don't already do so, please follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Chris Hedges and Boris Franklin. Chris Hedges is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of 12 books that include the bestseller War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning and America, the Farewell Tour. Hedges has taught courses in drama, literature, philosophy, and history since 2013 in the college degree program offered by Rutgers University at East New Jersey State Prison and other New Jersey prisons. In his first class at East Jersey State Prison, where students read and discussed plays by Amiri, Baraka, and August Wilson, among others, his class set out to write a play of their own. In writing the play, Aged, which would run for a month in 2018 to sold-out audiences at the Passage Theater in Trenton, New Jersey, and later be published, students gave words to the grief and suffering they and their families have endured, as well as their hopes and dreams. The class's artistic and personal discovery, as well as transformation, is chronicled in heartbreaking detail in Hedges' latest work, Our Class: Trauma and Transformation in an American Prison. This book gives a human face and a voice to those our society often demonizes and abandons, and exposes the terrible crucible and injustice of America's penal system and the struggle by those trapped within its embrace to live lives of dignity, meaning, and purpose. So Hedges will be joined in conversation by Boris Franklin, community organizer with the Industrial Areas Foundation and one of the principal authors of the play Caged. This evening's event will include an audience Q&A, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. As well, if someone has typed a question you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Most importantly, consider supporting Chris and Powell's by purchasing a copy of his book from us. A link to buy Our Class, along with Chris's other books, will be shared in the chat a couple of times tonight. All right, well, Chris and Boris, it's great to have you both here tonight, and thanks for joining us.
Sure. Why don't I open and then let Boris talk? When I first went into that class, which Boris was in, I didn't have any idea that we were going to write a play. I was teaching several plays, as you mentioned, by Amiri Baraka and McCraney and Miguel Panera and John Herbert and the great August Wilson. And it was clear from that first class that not a lot of people in the class had much firsthand experience with drama and theater and dramatic dialogue. And so on a whim, really, I suggested that the students write dramatic dialogue from their own lives. What I didn't know at the time was that one of the students, nicknamed Kabir in Arabic means big, and this guy's big, knew who I was, had heard me on WBAI, the Pacifica station out of New York, and had gone around and, in essence, recruited the most talented writers, some of the most talented writers in the prison, including Boris. And so when I got home, I had 28 students. When I got home, and all of it's handwritten on that kind of, the paper carries that kind of musty smell of the prison. So I would carry the odor of the prison home with me in that stack of papers. And I started reading through it. There was some really powerful, poetic writing in there. And this happened over a couple weeks. And I showed it to my wife, who's a professional actor, a Juilliard graduate, and said, maybe I could get them to write a play. So I stumbled into this process. I'll let Boris talk about that experience. And so my role was kind of as an editor. I mean, I was kind of the glue that would put their writings together. And a lot of it was incredibly emotional. I mean, people were writing about the trauma that they and their families had endured. but it was all organic. It wasn't pre-planned. And that's kind of from my standpoint as the teacher, the inception. And I'll let Boris speak a little bit about what it was like to sit in the class at the beginning of this.
Well, thanks, Chris. It was interesting. At first, we didn't know what we were about to get ourselves into. When one of the most important things I would say is that when Chris first came into the prison, when he came into the class, first you have to realize it's a maximum security prison. And he came in and he kind of gave us some rules for the culture of the class and just flat out said what he would not be accepting, right? Said there would be no people would show respect for other people's ideas. There would be no homophobic comments or anything as such, right? And I believe it was this that allowed him to win the respect of me and the class. And that's one thing that's very important inside of a prison, respect. And if we were going to have a smooth sailing class, then the instructor would have to have that level of respect. And, once he established that, then we were able to start figuring out where we were going to go next with the class. And there were a few plays and a few books that were suggested before he came up with the idea of having a play written by the class, which was something that none of us had actually heard of. In fact, it was unprecedented as far as I was concerned to have 28 people write a play all in different spaces because we weren't housed together. So the first idea was half of the class would actually write from their experiences from the outside, and the other half would write their experiences from the inside of prison. And what that means is that some of us was writing about our arrest, first of all, like what it was like to be arrested. And then some people were writing about their first day in prison. This was sort of the genesis of a process that began and continued throughout the whole process of writing a play. And what you had is that, sort of a symphony of voices, right? Everybody's singing their song, what Chris liked to call our song, right? And he's sort of orchestrating and figuring out how can we make this noise sound like music, which was a extremely tough thing to do because everybody had a different cadence, right? So it was really, really difficult to find out how do we strike that chord that makes things sound like music. And somehow we were able to do that and begin to start singing like, a real chorus and sounding like we were singing one song. That was how the play sort of took shape in the first days of the class.
I mean, what was interesting for me, you build kind of emotionally protective walls. You don't share much in a prison. People don't even use their legal name in a prison. They use their nickname. And by writing these scenes, people were getting up and speaking about incredibly difficult and traumatic moments in their lives, and that people would tear up. Some people couldn't read it. I remember one of our students. I said, "Well, we need a scene with a mother. We need a dialogue with a mother. So why don't you write? Everybody should write some kind of dialogue with their mother that they remember." And at the end of the class, Timmy came up and said, "Well, what if we're a product of rape?" And I said, "Well, Timmy, that's what you have to write." And so he writes this autobiographical moment where he's in the county jail, and he's from Paterson, New Jersey. He was with his half-brother in a car. The car was stopped in search. There was a weapon in the car. It was his half-brother's weapon. And if nobody admitted possession of the weapon, everybody gets a weapons charge. And so the phone call with his mother is, "It doesn't matter, Ma. I was never supposed to be here anyway, and you have the son you love." And at the end, Boris can talk about the end, we brought in the great theologian James Cone and Cornel West as our audience. And when Timmy read that moment, that scene, read that part, and then he disappeared. And I said, "Where's Timmy? Where's Timmy?" And they said, "I think he's in the bathroom." And I found him just hunched over, sobbing in the corner of the bathroom. So there was, it peeled back. And again, this was inadvertent, but it shattered these emotional walls. And suddenly all this incredibly powerful and moving stuff was coming out. And I just want to say, since Boris is here, two other students, it was Lawrence and Sincere and you, right, Boris? They were kind of the script doctors. So every time we got to an impasse, I would send Boris and Sincere and Lawrence down the hall, all fine writers. Boris had written, extensively before I came to the prison, to fix it up. But I'll let Boris speak a little bit about that. But it very quickly became an emotionally charged class.
Yeah. And that's what I said. Like, I think near the end of the class that, we were all just sharing what we felt. And I thought that was extremely therapeutic. In a space, in a prison that somehow has programs, that prides themselves on being able to be under the banner of corrections, I think that bringing that sort of art in there did more in terms of therapy and healing for individuals that had experienced some level of trauma, right? To be able to have some of the pain run its course by writing these stories and being able to get it out. Like Timmy was able to share some things that he had never shared with anybody. I had been in that prison with him for over 5 years, and we've never gotten that personal. In fact, I didn't know his last name. That was just something you didn't do. There was boundaries crossed in that class that allowed us to reclaim our humanity. And another revealing thing about the class was that some individuals had been locked up so long that their reality had become a mashup of fantasy and movies that they have seen. And that's another thing that highlights the trauma of being placed inside of a prison so long that you forget you actually existed in the real world. And when no one reaches back to write you or to say hello and I hope you're doing okay, sometimes that world starts to disappear and you can't remember what's memory or what's fantasy. And that was playing out in some of the writings. And, and as we begin to shape the play, we had to carve out some of that, right? We had to carve out some of the things that were fantasies, because if you hadn't done a lot in life, you take someone like Lawrence Bell, right? You tell him to write from the outside. He's arrested at 14 and gets life in prison. There's not much of an outside experience he has besides the tragedy that led him to prison. So most of his experience is going to be in the prison, which is akin to Groundhog Day. You have a menu that will repeat itself for the next 30 years. There'll be fish on Friday, and there'll be chicken on Sunday, and on Monday you'll have pancakes. I could still remember the menu, and so sometimes there's not much that an individual has to write about, but then they find out that even their small amount of experiences, or even some of the experience they had in the prison, is worth writing about. It's worth getting out and expressing, how you feel about some things, and possibly allowing them to run its course.
What was interesting about Lawrence, this was a wonderful student who, as Boris said, was arrested at the age of 14. His parents had died. His father died when he was 2. His mother died when he was, I think, 9. He was an orphan. He was living in an abandoned house in Camden, New Jersey, per capita, the poorest city in the United States, and usually year after year, one of, or often the most violent city in America. And he had not spoken about going into prison so young. Among those in the class, the people in the class didn't know. He didn't speak about it publicly because, as he said, so much of prison talk is about what your experiences were on the outside. And as Boris said, he didn't have any experiences on the outside. And this gets into this whole horrific judicial system that will try children as adults. He was dragged into a Camden police station. He was forced to sign a confession. He's functionally illiterate, very low level literacy. He hadn't been going to school. He gets to the court, he hears what's in the confession, he tries to speak up to say that that's not correct, that he didn't do that, and he's slapped down, and he wasn't eligible to go before a parole board until he was 70 years old. He's fortunately got out because of a great public defender, Jennifer Saletti, who stepped in and got him a resentencing hearing. But even then, he had no family. So they won't, even if they resentenced him and to time served and released, they wouldn't release him without an address. He had no address. So I and Boris and Ron, my garage was filled with furniture, and we got him an apartment. We had to get him an apartment for a year. We had to start renting that apartment 2 to 3 months before he was released. He went on to graduate summa cum laude from Rutgers. But here was somebody who, as Boris said, his entire life was the prison. A very fine student. I remember teaching a history class a couple of years later, and as Boris will tell you, I'm a very hard grader. So he was one of the A's. I only give a handful of A's. And he waited till everyone in the class left. And he said, I know I'm going to die in this prison, but I work as hard as I do because one day I'm going to be a teacher like you. And he walks out. So here you had somebody who was denied a life, really. And he was trying to make the best of himself in this carceral space. And that's why I admire these people like Boris and Lawrence and others. I don't think that many of us could go through what they went through, not only in the prison, but even before. And I'll let Boris speak a little bit about the poverty that they come out of and become who they have become.
Yeah, and one thing I want to say in light of Lawrence Bell, right, for an individual who had not had life experiences, the fact that he could be such a fine writer in that play, that he could empathize and get into the skin of those characters, find their humanity and write from that perspective, having been in a cage since he was 14, is almost extraordinary, because he don't have the experiences to relate. You know, if a character is, one of the characters has a child, right, and he went to jail at 14. He has no real experiences with a woman or anything, right? It's in a capacity in which you would be able to understand the complex nature of being into some sort of a romantic relationship. But nevertheless, he could pull it off. Because there's nothing that would have led me to believe that he had been in jail since he was 14, that he actually said. And another thing that I like to point out, could you imagine, Chris, if we had not had that class? Lawrence Bell would still be sitting in prison, because you never would have met him. We never would have got these stories. And he would be sitting in prison until he's 70-something years old. And that is for sure, right? So this class was something that I don't know where it came from, but it's still the gift that keeps giving.
Well, it created bonds. I mean, I write that at the beginning of the book, that none of us had any idea that first night that this would, that years later our lives would be intertwined. I met Boris when he got out. He can make fun of me for that. I met him with his mom. He says I was crying more than his mom.
I got the footage, so you know what.
At one point, his mom comes over and starts hugging me.
Yeah, I just got out of jail from doing 11 years, and she has to console Chris because he can't stop crying. I was like, you think he had just got out of jail? I was like, wow. But it did bond us in a way that we're family. I mean, me, Lawrence, all of us keep in touch and we check on each other. You know what I mean? And we support each other, and we created a family, an extended family that has a lot of love for each other. That all started in a class with a small guy who walks into a maximum security prison and has the audacity to tell a bunch of what other people would have considered hardened criminals what they were going to do, and then say, and I'm going to dare you to open up and be vulnerable in a place that is considered, dangerous. And we dared to be vulnerable, and we became more human than we had ever been. And I guess that is the transformation part of it, because at some point when those walls come down, you're allowed to start developing. We begin to turn into, the process of becoming men happened a lot faster in that space. The personalities begin to develop a lot quicker.
I want to talk a little bit about the play. I'm going to let Boris talk about it, but really, so we did when I originally started casting the play, I said, "Who wants a part?" And only 7 people said they wanted a part. But as the weeks went by, all 28 students wanted a part. So we had 28 parts in the play. Everybody had a voice, and we couldn't. I made a promise to them that I would do everything in my power to get the play produced. And I was extremely fortunate in that Boris was the first student out, probably the strongest writer in the class, and he and I spent probably hundreds of hours working to make that play work on stage. We were assisted by my wife, but also by a theater director in New York, Jeff Wise, who workshopped it. And as Boris will tell you, we would sit here in my house at this computer, and it was so painful to cut any line because we both heard the voices of those students. The play was eventually produced and performed at the Passage Theater in Trenton, New Jersey. Boris, they were all equity actors except for Boris, who I think was one of the most powerful, maybe the most powerful figure on the stage. And that last scene, which Boris wrote, is about an older prisoner, an old head, stopping a younger prisoner from going into the mess hall, which is, along with the yard, the most dangerous place in a prison, and shanking somebody or knifing somebody who had killed his brother. And I remember watching Boris do it, and he was, of course, writing out of his own experience. This is something that he had done, and he was pushing the younger person who was trying to go in the mess hall. And I asked him after the play why, and he said, because if he didn't give me the shank, I would have had to start a fight, so we both would go to lockdown, and the killing wouldn't take place. But Jarrell Henderson directed it out of Chicago, and he articulated, he said, this is really a play about radical love, about a family that disintegrates because the mother has cancer. It's based on a true story. But I'll let Boris talk about that. That I think that was what was, and I think Henderson was right, that Jarrell was right, that at its core, it was about self-sacrifice among the family, but also among those who are incarcerated. And the old head who's never going to get out, sacrificing. But I'll let Boris kind of spell that out.
Yeah, and I think Jarrell did get that right about radical love, because it's what Dr. West would say, cuts against the grain, right? It's like a rose in the concrete. It's not, you wouldn't think it would exist in that space with people who have nothing, and you would think they would be, angry, disgruntled, hardened, and lack of emotion. There is a lot of caring that goes on in a place like that. And for that character, where I was drawing from, there was a young man that I used to sort of mentor, because I was friend to his brother, and his brother had went to prison. And after his brother went to prison, he sort of spiraled, right? And his mother used to come get me, and, because he didn't have things, I would go out and I would maybe buy him sneakers to try to con him into going to school or whatever. But he had really started to spiral and got into the streets. And very quickly, one day, his mom came to me and said he was down at the sheriff's office and he wouldn't calm down. So I went down there to talk to him, and I told him, I said, listen, man, you're going to be all right. You're going to have to go to juvie, but I'm not going to abandon you. I'm going to be there, right? And so he calmed down. He went to juvenile detention center, and then I went to prison. So in fact, I was not able to actually be there for him. And the next time we're meeting in the maximum security prison at Rawway. And here he is in the mess hall. And the first thing he said to me was, man, get me a shank. He wanted me to get him a knife because, he had some activities that he may have felt he needed to handle. And I was just really adamant about, no, I'm not getting you a shank. I'm not allowing you to do this type of thing, because I didn't want him to serve such a long, lengthy prison sentence. And that's sort of what happened with the character. He didn't want, Omar, the old head didn't want Omar to have to suffer what he had suffered. And that's where that radical love plays out. You would think that people wouldn't be that loving in that space, but there's a lot of love and there's a lot of respect and a lot of humanity in prison. And this play allowed us to show that.
Yeah, there is and Boris can talk about this better than I can, but there is a prison code which says, if somebody kills a family member, then you have to exact revenge, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But really, what the play deals with is the fact that that prison code is honored more in the breach than in the observance. And I'll let Boris speak about that. I've heard Boris say it. The way you essentially skirt the code is he's a phantom, you're a phantom.
Well, you can't really say anything. I was in there with a guy who thought that I had something to do with the demise of his brother, but he never let anyone know who I was. We were both aware of each other, because if he had really made a loud, sound about it, then that prison code would have demanded he does something about it, or he would have lost some level of respect or social status, which is a very dangerous thing in a predatory environment, because, that environment can turn very predatory in a New York minute. And see, that is the thing, is that makes the tension so tight, because there is a lot of respect because the tension is wound tight. So if anything goes wrong, it can go horribly wrong. All of the things that guys are fighting to try to maintain their humanity, it can come crashing down at any moment. Like, a fight could start in the mess hall and it could turn into a riot. And then anxiety and panic and so many things could happen in that space. But and the thing is, a lot of people know of victims, because we're all from New Jersey. So if you're doing time in New Jersey and you have a homicide, chances are you're doing time with someone's family member, or someone knows who you are. And a lot of people just walk past each other very quietly. They make it a point to not be in the same space as that other person, to not have a physical touch when you're trying to make it in and out of a mess hall into a tight space. You sort of give that person the space, and that's sort of like respect. I'm not gonna just be cocky and walk around you as if I've done something and I don't care how you feel about it. So there's also some remorse in there by giving that individual that space and that respect, because that's all you can give them at this point. Um, that's pretty much how it plays out.
One of the things that comes out in the play are the conditions of our carcel state. 80,000 people, as I speak, are in solitary confinement. One of the students, Steph Williams, writes he bought a cell phone from a guard. This is based on his own experience. He's caught with a cell phone. They send him to ADSEG, which is an isolation unit, for a year. And people go insane in there. People cut themselves, they kill themselves, they cover their walls with feces. It's sweltering in the summer, 95 degrees, and they'll sell you little bags of ice for 75 cents that you rub on your face and that melt. It's freezing in the winter. There was somebody in ADSEG with him who adopted a mouse and put it on a string. That got into the play. So there's the conditions of the prisons, why we couldn't really perform the play in the prison, because it would have angered the administration, and of course the retribution would have been taken out on my students. But the savagery of our system of mass incarceration is an elemental part of the play. I'll let Boris speak to that.
Yes, and when you're put into that space, I think about the first time I walked on Four Wing. I'm 5'8", arguably, and I guess I have a wingspan of 5'8", and with my arms spread, I can touch each wall in the cell, right? And once you live in a space like that, and that's with me coming out every day. But when you talk about going to ASAG, everybody's mind ain't designed to handle ASAG, because it's just you and your thoughts trying to make sense of how you wound up in this space. How could life be so, unforgiving? And a lot of guys get a religion, they wish on a star, but I'm gonna tell you, every day you wake up, that reality will not change. You will still be in that prison. And some guys are trying to make sense of their own personal self-worth. Did I mean anything to anybody? There's so many questions that can allow your mind to get away from you. And if you go into a negative train of thought, it could just actually blow your mind. And you've seen guys do that. Some guys use anger as a tool to stay sane. They'll just argue with the guards. And by having that negative dialogue keeps them grounded. Actually, whatever tool you have at your disposal is what you do to sort of survive. You know, some guys will try to talk to each other from cell to cell, but the interesting part about that is that you can get a charge for that. They actually don't want you talking to the prisoner in the next cell. They want you to sit in solitary confinement quietly. You know, the first time I went to ASEC in a youthful correctional facility, that was one of the things that I thought that was crazy. You know, the guards was like, I don't want to hear any noise. I don't want anyone talking to anybody. And if I catch you talking, they would run down on the cell, try to figure out who was doing the talking, and you would serve a charge and you get more time in ASEC. And everybody didn't survive that period.
I want to talk about the court system. I get Boris to talk about it too. I mean, only 94% or 94% of the people who go to prison plea out. So only 6% get a jury trial. The court system is not designed to carry out jury trials. So they stack all sorts of charges against you. And the prosecutor and police know you didn't commit a lot of them, but that's so they can take them off and barter. But the students that I've taught with the longest sentences are the ones who go to trial. And often they're the ones who didn't commit the crime, Leak and others, because they think that their innocence will be validated. In fact, they get the longest sentences because they have to be made an example of. Because if everybody goes and asks for a jury trial, the system crashes. So the entire, Boris was picked up, I think, under RICO, right? Weren't you picked up under RICO laws? I mean, this is where you get a bunch of guys in a room, an incident happens, and if you don't immediately call 911, everybody in the room gets charged. So the whole system is, I mean, it's a form of social control. We say it doesn't work. It probably works quite well as it's designed to work. You rupture the social bonds in a deindustrialized urban area. The only way often you can survive is to engage in the underground or illegal economy, and your primary forms of social control become militarized police and mass incarceration, the prison system. And that's, of course, why we have the world's largest prison population. 25% of the world's prisoners are in the United States. We're less than 5% of the world's population. And the sentences are triple or quadruple what they are anywhere else, courtesy of the 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill led by Joe Biden and Bill Clinton. And so the whole judicial system is dysfunctional from the standpoint of actually giving people any form of justice.
Yeah, and I was actually picked up on a felony murder charge, right? Because I didn't commit any murder, but so they couldn't find the reason to charge me, you know, because it was a drug deal in which another guy wound up shooting the guy, and they wanted to charge everybody with this, so they charged with a felony murder. So I didn't even have a weapons charge, and I got a 15-year sentence with 11 years mandatory, and I negotiated that sentence just so that my mother wouldn't lose two sons, because my brother was one of my co-defendants, and both of us wasn't going to jail for 15 years, you know, but that was a decision we had to work out within ourselves. And the risk was going to trial was possibly winding up in jail for the rest of your life. And
well, like, because I know in your case, they charged you with kidnapping, you know, completely fictitious. That's a 25-year sentence, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 20 years for if they say you let the individual out in a safe space. We didn't even know he was in a car. The child lock was on. Right. So when we left because there was a shooting, the child lock was on and you wound up with that charge. But they have all type of interesting ways to over indict you and then plea you down to where you should have been charged. So there's actually no bargain in that respect. And these are the things that bottleneck the system. And now they're working tirelessly to figure out, okay, so how do we get nonviolent drug offenses out so we can make more room for violent crime offenders? Right. But the unique part of that is that I'm registered as I would have been seen as a violent crime offender who didn't commit a violent act. Never put my hands on no one, didn't have a gun, but I'm still a violent crime offender. So now when you hear these laws and I hear people say, you know, hear the legislators say, well, you know, nonviolent crime offenders can get this, but the violent crime offenders can't. I'm thinking that, wow, it's like 85% of the people who are locked up for a violent crime have actually never committed a violent crime. and they don't have any ability to access some of the things that will probably make life easier for them when they get out.
So almost everything in the play was autobiographical. It happened to someone in the classroom, and you couldn't make this stuff up. One student, Thomas Dollard, goes to Trenton, and they put him in a cell, and the guard comes by and says, "Oh, that was the cell your father was in." Yeah. Another student wrote about, who probably will die in prison, wrote about the guards finding his corpse in a cell, and he writes this very chilling kind of banter, nonchalant banter of the guards as they shackle the corpse, because the rules are that even if you take a corpse out of the prison, it has to be shackled. And so all of this stuff comes out, including the way they charge you. If you get 15 minutes if a family member has died or is dying, but you have to pay the overtime of the guards. So it's $800, $900, $1,000, which is prohibitive when you're making $28 a month working in a prison. Everything is, I'll close and then we can do questions, but everything in American prisons are privatized. We talk about private prisons, but in state and federal prisons, all the services are run by for-profit corporations. JPay, which is the money transfer service, Global Tellink, which is the phone service, Rmark, which provides the food, and there's constant, the food is rancid and often spoils. There's constant cases of food poisoning in prisons throughout the United States. The commissary is privatized, medical is privatized. This is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry. And all their lobbyists are in Washington, making sure that recidivism rate, which is 76% of people who are released within 5 years return to prison, because that's how they make their money. And I'll let Boris have the closing statement, but for me, prisons are just the modern iteration of plantations. They function, we have 2.3 million prisoners. 1 million of them work for-profit corporations in sweatshops. McDonald's, for instance, makes its uniforms in prison. And then there's DepCorp, was the state agency. I mean, and under the 13th Amendment, these people don't have to be paid a minimum wage. And in prison systems like Georgia, they're not paid at all. But I'll let Boris close, and then we can do questions.
And if I could use that analogy, some of the guards turned into the overseers. You know, we've had projects like the Stanford Project, what they had to cut because some of the students were becoming so mean. And this was a project. They weren't actually guards. So the guards suffer a scar as well, and they have a high divorce rate. And at some point, they have more in common with the guys in prison. They're just a different gang or set of individuals within the prison. And some of them blend with the prisoners very, very well. You know, they gamble with them, and you spend most of your time. And then the relationships form in the prison with some of the other guards. I mean, it's society, but within society, right? And it's completely dysfunctional because when you go back into society, it's like you just came from an upside down world. All of the things are different, you know, and now you're thrown back into a space where you have no social status. You know, the guard doesn't have the same level of social status that he has in the prison, and neither does the prisoner. Like when we talked about Shaky Brown and prisoners who are very important inside the prisoner when they go home, you know, what value do they have outside of prison? They haven't had an opportunity to create any real value. So it's an atrocity, and it's a trauma on all individuals involved who spend a considerable amount of time inside of a prison.
Well, and a high percentage of the guards are vets from Iraq and Afghanistan. I used to pull into the parking lot. They pull in all pumped up in their pickup trucks. And there's also a high percentage of veterans in the prison. I think, 25%. We had a lot of veterans in that class.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We have a few questions in the chat. I'll read a couple of them. First, there was a guy named Wayne Cole. I said we would answer his question live, and it's probably more for you, Chris. He said he was a painter, and it's a lot easier for ministers to get into prison, but he said he he would like to go inside of a prison. He wanted to know, is there a process for getting into prison to teach?
So I can only tell you every state is different. In the Rutgers program, NJ STEP, which is a great program, allows students to get their associates and their bachelor's degree. And if they have a 3.1, they can, and they get out, they can matriculate, as Boris did, to finish his degree at Rutgers. You have to have at least a master's degree in order to teach. So that was the requirement in New Jersey, but again, every state education program is different.
And there is Eric Gunderson who wanted to know whether issues of racial tension in the prison, that the class addressed, and if so, how did you navigate those tensions? Racial tensions weren't really that high. That's one thing that everyone understood, that we were prisoners, and that sort of thing. It was basically you against the guards, and anything that breached that was disloyal, like a snitch within the prison who would work with the guards and tell what things were going on, if drugs were coming in or whatever. But surprisingly, there's really no racial tension there. You'd have more tension between gangs before you have a tension between race.
Although I would say, Boris, in the New Jersey prison system, whites are a distinct minority. Unlike, for instance, Ohio, where it's often split 50-50. So like at the Lucasville prison uprising, you had three distinct groups. You had gangster disciples, Muslims, black Muslims, and then you had the white Aryans, I think they're called, the white. And what would made the Lucasville prison uprising so amazing is that the head of it, who's now on death row, although he didn't kill anybody, but he led the uprising, Sadiq Hassan, immediately negotiated with the two other groups, including the white Aryans. And when they retook the prison after 11 days, spray painted on the walls were, there's no race, there's only convict race, black and white together. That drives the guards nuts. But in the Jersey prison system, whites are a distinct minority. And it was interesting, we were talking about a friend of ours, Ron. I said, well, how did they, and Boris said, no, the white guys can fight. They can fight.
Yeah, if you exist at that level, that's what they called Ron. They called him rebel. And because he's a minority, he knows that he may be outnumbered if he start winning, but Ron is prepared to be outnumbered. So he goes in, well, he used to go in, because now he's square as me. Right? But everybody knew not to mess with Ron Pierce, man, because, a lot of the white guys knew that they had to be really tough and they had to represent, because, if not, they'd be taken advantage of. And he was definitely not going to be taken advantage of. And he happened to be one of the smartest guys I know.
Oh, yeah. He was also a big guy. He was a Marine Corps vet, 18-inch biceps. So, and he's also got, I shouldn't say this, but hopefully he's not watching. He got a prison tattoo that says in huge letters, F Society on his stomach.
Yeah, he's a complete biker, but he can tell you everything about biology and
he's brilliant. Yeah.
Environment. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. But had we had classes together, I would have never known that, because we had never had conversations.
Well, he also looks the part. He's covered with prison tattoos, and yeah, but he's extremely cerebral. Yeah, it's really interesting.
What do we have? We have what would it take to repeal the ominous crime bill, especially now that something moved somebody on? Biden is I guess in office, and it's weaponized, privatized carceral industry. What would it take? There's been some work, right? Well, now there's no more mandatory minimums, which New Jersey together we led a fight with that, and we pushed the governor to actually we put the bill on his desk, and what he did was he instructed the attorney general to make sure that there's no more mandatory minimums. The bill didn't actually get signed in the way in which we wanted, but there's more fighting to do. But the attorney general issued a directive, as long as he was in office, that there would be no more mandatory minimums for nonviolent drug offenses. So what that means for me is that it's so much in that bill that we'd be picking it apart for the next 10 years. So there is work to do, and there's work that can be done. And that's why being able to be an organizer and be instrumental in that part, and is a big deal for me. And I was also actually able on Juneteenth to sign a bill with the governor that says that they can no longer discriminate in housing for individuals who have a criminal record. So we're chipping away at it, and we're picking it apart. And which is funny is because a lot of guys that came out of that class that Chris met in prison, he introduced us to the Industrial Areas Foundation, and a lot of us are now community organizers, and we're doing the work in tearing down some of these bills and different things that make life very difficult to be restarted once you get back into society, or so that you don't go in for such a long time and get a fair sentence and have a fair shot at making something of yourself once you get out.
I think the way to break it is to, there are these prison strikes, which we have to support, because if people on the inside earn minimum wage, which they deserve, the prison system economically would not be sustainable. And I think that's really the key, that we have to support the strikes, and we have to push for minimum wage. That's going to create the kind of pressure. In 1970, we had 300,000 people in our prison system. And Boris and I both have met people that should not be walking the streets, but that's a mental health issue. And as Boris, I'll let Boris talk about this, but he's often said, the real killers, there are very few real killers in prison who everyone avoids. But I'll let you address that issue.
Yeah, that's what you find out is that, there are a lot of people who reach certain boiling points, and because of where they were and what was available, things got away from them. But when you're talking about an individual who's really dangerous, you're talking about a killer. There's so few, and they don't last long in population. They're usually in ASEG. I mean, there was a guy who killed a guy in the mess hall, and he killed him in front of at least 100 people. And those guys experienced so much trauma. They just put their heads down and cried while this guy just sat there and killed the guy with his bare hands, broke his back, put his head under a coffee pot, melted the skin off his face, picked him up, broke his body over a rail. And guys are just sitting there crying. And one unique thing is nobody received any therapeutic treatment for that. Just sitting there witnessing that. And that's the tape they play for COs now to tell them don't get too close to the inmates, as if every individual in there has the capacity to have this sort of a outburst. No, there's not many individuals in there who would be considered killers. There's a lot of people who have, vehicular homicides. Some people have, murdered someone by accident, have only been a part of something. There's very, very few killers inside of a prison. I have another thing where this is an anonymous attendee that says, thank you for sharing hope and joy of real people this evening. Boris and Chris, I work with infants and toddlers with disabilities and their families. How can we do better for babies and families both? By including family members who are experiencing incarceration in the process of service and support for their young children. We'll take on that part of it. How can we do more for babies and toddlers? I don't know, what is the number, Chris, for how many individuals have incarcerated parents in our state? We have 2.2 million prisoners. How many children?
Well, more than that, obviously, and I'll let you speak as a father to that issue, because that's something you've had to deal with, and with a great deal of tragedy.
Yeah, and to do more is to be able to bring those families into a prison and create a space where you could still create some sort of a bond, right? And there's attempts at some sort of parenting programs that is too few. But some of it does help to allow individuals to be able to come on a separate night and just the families to be there and sit down for an hour or two. But I mean, that's the best that you can do at this point. It's really a therapeutic part. And it takes a lot of parenting skills or just people skills to learn how to establish and to create a bond with someone you're only going to see for about 2 hours, maybe a month. It's not an easy thing to do.
And as you have often spoken, Boris, I mean, after 5 years, a lot of those students have, there was I think it was Dollard or somebody said, just because your family doesn't visit you doesn't mean they don't love you. One of the students wrote about his wife visiting him with their son, who was quite young, and the son keeps talking about Uncle Jimmy this, Uncle Jimmy that. And at the end of the visit, he realized what's going on. And he says, okay, I know you've got to get on with your life, but at least bring my son so I can see him. And I asked him, well, when was the last time you saw your son? He said that was the last time. I said, how old is your son now? He said he's 24. So that abandonment is I'm let Boris speak to it, but it's exhausting. I mean, even Boris told his own mother not to visit.
Yeah, it's hard on everybody. At some point, the guards was taking my family through so much. I told her, I don't have that much time left. Don't come back up here. And my son, it was very difficult for my sons to form relationships with me. They were very angry about me abandoning my post for so long. My youngest son, at some point, he just said he didn't want to come anymore, right? Because when I went to jail, I had a 6-year-old who was in college when I got out. I was a grandfather by the time I got out. And my son, who suffered the most, by the time I came home, he was on the run from the cops. He had, the only way that he could get close to me was to sort of live the life he thought I lived. And on a visit, once I asked him, because he was getting in trouble, I asked him, what did he think of me? I was like, I thought he was trying to be like me. And I'm like, what do you think, I was some sort of a thug? And he was like, and he said, yes. And I remember trying to walk in my father's shoes, literally to get to understand him a little bit better. And my son walked in my shoes. And when I came home, I remember trying to just get out in time to connect with him. And by the time I got home, it was absolutely too late. And then he was tangled up in the court system, and he was ushered off to prison. And the unfortunate part of that is that we never got a chance to build a bond because he got killed in a fist fight inside of a cell in prison, maybe a year and a half ago, which was completely devastating for me. Something that just completely just keeps playing over in my head. But never getting there in time to have a conversation with him, didn't get to know him. There's pictures I look at, the smile, the laugh. I don't know it the way other people appreciate him. And when people talk about him, I'm so jealous of the fact that they had an opportunity to get to know him in a way in which I'll never be able to get to know him. And for my other son, my oldest son, it took the better part of about 5 years to build something solid. And I remember maybe about a few months ago, when he called me dad, I thought he did it by mistake. He's never said that to me. We came up with names where he just called me old school, and then I started calling him new school, but he had never said dad. And then one day, a couple of months ago, he called me dad, and I was like, wow, that's crazy. But it took 5 long years of patience and just understanding his pain and not trying to force him and hoping, because there was no guarantee that he would ever accept me, as his father, because he didn't need one by the time I came home. He was a young man, he was grown. So it is a difficult process. I'm looking, I think we have a few more questions. How was the transition to life back outside of prison? And what was the hardest part? This is Judy Henderson. I haven't been calling out names, but so forgive me. The transition, there was a professor who told me it would take 5 years for me to settle in, and I thought he was ridiculous. I said, that's not true. But you don't know the scars that prison have left on you until one day you realize you feel like you got cabin fever. At some point, I had to just get out of the house, I didn't know what I was experiencing. I was so afraid to break, not break the law. I was afraid to break a rule, because especially when you're on parole, because you think you're going to get ushered off back to prison. And when I think of that, when I see guys like Ron who have lifetime parole, they can get sent back to prison at any time. That is a horrifying experience. I mean, I'm off parole and I'm still, shell shocked about crossing a line too far that could get me into contact with the police, who will pull up my prison record and handle me differently after that. You're aware of that. If African American, as an African American male, if I had a double conscience, I had a triple conscience now. Because I'm not just a black man in America, I'm a black man with a prison record now. And I have a charge that if I was an individual on the underside of a wrongful shooting, they might justify it. This guy is a hardened criminal. And like Chris writes early part of the book, who uses that Michelle Alexander quote, right? I believe it was, that says, that once you create a person and created them and make them a criminal, then you could do things to them that you can't do to an ordinary citizen. I don't want to butcher the quote, but you understand what I'm talking about. And the transition is hard. It's hard. You just got to keep, like I once said, every day you just got to keep getting out of prison. You got to keep getting out of prison. You got to hear yourself telling prison stories and say, you have other experiences, and you just got to keep trying to get your head out every day. And for a guy that did 11 years, my heart aches for the guys who did 30 years, because here it is. I'm 6 years out and I'm doing well in that department, but I still have that as something that I struggle with. And then I think if I had 30 years to be boxed in, that's a tough task. These guys are suffering silently, and they're doing a good job. They're doing a wonderful job, because if you walk past them on the street, you wouldn't even know it. And they're the most polite and loving guys you would meet, but they're struggling with the trauma of having been in prison and trying to be reacclimated back into society, where you came from a space where there was a boundary. You were considered a prisoner, and anyone who came in a prisoner was considered a civilian. So there was a thing where, as though you can't touch them. So that wall is still there because it was there for so long. When your family come to visit you, you can hug when they first get there, and then you can't touch. You can hug when they leave, and then that's it. So you're devoid of the human touch, and there's so many things that you have to get over and be able to love and connect with other people after being in a space like that, where connecting and loving is hard, because you can wake up one day and someone never writes you again. I mean, there's so many things that you have to contend with, but you just have to just keep getting out, and individuals have to understand that it's a process.
I remember Boris saying, after you got out, you'd be in a restaurant and you thought everybody in that restaurant knew that you had been in prison. You said, I felt like I was still wearing a Department of Corrections uniform, that people saw me and immediately saw me as a prisoner or an ex-prisoner.
Yeah, absolutely. And you feel that all the time. I think less so in the capacity in which I work, but I have to tell my story, so mostly everyone knows that I've been in prison, and this is therapeutic, to talk about it and to own it, and still know that I still have a self-worth and some value, and I can add value to the world, and that I'm not, a permanent criminal cast, and I could never reclaim my society or full citizenship. You cast out. You're literally cast out, and you're a criminal. That guy's an ex-con, or you're cast out of society in a way. And even though they're relaxing some of the legislation, you can't get those boundaries out of your head for quite some time. And I don't know if you can ever go back.
And yet the reality of the prison, people sometimes would ask me how I felt, and I would say quite truthfully, the safest place I've ever been in my life is in that classroom.
We have Katie Kara, who says, how do people learn to read if they have not achieved a strong level of comprehension before the class? You want to talk about that a little bit, Chris?
Well, it's competitive to get into the college program. So we had Sammy in the class. He came into prison illiterate. I think 40% of the prison population comes in illiterate or functionally illiterate or close to illiterate. And they do offer GED programs, high school equivalency programs. But I would say that the majority of the people in that class are people like Boris, who've turned their cells into libraries. So Boris gets out of prison after 11 years. I'm at the gate, and as I said, his first words he says to me are, I have to rebuild my library. So what you're talking about are what Gramsci calls organic intellectuals. And this is part of the tragedy, as somebody who cares about the world of ideas, and to see people like Boris, who have a kind of deep hunger and a brilliance, and they never had that chance to have that side of themselves developed. So these are intellectuals. They, as Boris said, they'd be out lifting weights and talking about Aristotle.
Yeah. And you have a lot of people, you got to understand, a lot of individuals come from these poor communities with poor school systems. And at a time when they would have been gaining some sort of an appetite for knowledge and reading, it's not there. No one sort of fosters that. This just doesn't happen. The school I went to two different districts. Piscataway was a great district at the time, and New Brunswick was a failing district. When I got to New Brunswick, it was nothing there. There was nothing there. It was Survive and Fight Club is what it was. There was really, the curriculum was no good. We had one teacher come in and she was refusing to teach it. She said, I'm not going to teach that curriculum. And they told her she had to. So she gave us all of our books on the first day of school, taught the curriculum, and then threw it in the garbage. And they couldn't do anything to her. Her name was Miss Toffel, and I did not like her. But my mother would not take me out of class. She said, that's the first time you have been challenged. And she took us downtown to see a play, The Man of La Mancha, Don Quixote, which was the first play I seen. I think that's where I found my love for theater. But then I read The Pearl, I read The Good Earth, so I was exposed to a dialogue and, conversation that you weren't going to get in any other class. But this teacher had the audacity, she was much like Chris, to come in a place and just break the rules and say, you know what, we're going to do it different. We're going to do something very different and something very radical. And it's going to pay off. and we were scared of change. We didn't know what was going to happen, and it worked. And here was experiencing this again. I don't know how much time we have for more questions, but do you want me to read another one?
Should we do? I think it's an hour. Should we do one more? Sure.
They want to know, will Cage be produced again with a touring show?
It's published by Haymarket, and it's really about somebody picking it up. I don't know whether Jeff is going to do it, or, the problem with COVID hit, so the theaters are only reopening now. I can certainly see it being done, especially at a university level. Yeah. I think it elucidates the reality of poverty, police violence, dysfunctional courts, and of course prison. In that sense, it's fiction, but it's a kind of docudrama. There's very little in it. I'm only saying little because I can't actually think of something that's made up. But as Boris will tell you, it was quite an effort. He and I spent a lot of time not only getting it in shape, but then trying to find somebody to put it up. It was a lot of work. We were committed to making the voices of those students heard. But it was how many years did we do it? We were working on it, I don't know, 3 years or something.
Yeah, because I came home in 2015 and we put it on in 2008.
Yeah, 3 years.
And there were people who came at us and promised us things, and
yeah,
we were always having to huddle up to figure out, is this a good fit? Are they serious? Or are they pulling our legs? And it was a process. And then the hardest part of the process, I know that everybody involved with the play was so tired of me and Chris crying like babies every time something had to get cut. We'd be sitting over there every time they'd be like, well, I think we need to cut this out and double that up. And then we'll be like, oh, but Sincere wrote that part, or somebody wrote that part. And they were looking at us like, you gotta be kidding me. Max. But I gotta say that having Eunice there to guide us even when picking the scenes, and she was totally against us cutting much of anything as well, because you had to be there when we read that play in the prison. And we didn't read the whole play. We read portions of the play, but it was so raw.
Yeah.
And so real. We shaped it and we put it on stage, but what was done in that prison cannot be duplicated.
Yeah, that right.
That was perfection.
Well, people read their own parts and the emotion came through. It it may have been, they may not have been, the alliteration and all that may not have been dramatically perfect, but Boris is right. The power of that, it cannot be replicated.
Hey, well, thank you guys so much both for joining us this evening. That was such a great talk, really interesting. This is the book here. I'm sure that's here. So yeah, just please consider purchasing a copy of that off of Powell's.com and support Chris and support Powell's. So, and be sure to check out upcoming events when you're there. And we'd love to see you at another one. But thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you both so much. That was fantastic. So it's great to have you.
For us.
Absolutely.
Thanks for inviting me. Good to see you, Chris, and I'll be seeing you again soon.
I got to go back to my chess game.
Yep, go back to your chess.
My daughter, she's 10. I'm like, can barely hold her off. It's like really awful.
Me and this guy work out together.
Yeah, that's right. He's got 355 on the bench going, okay, I know technically you're spotting, but if I drop it, there's not much you're going to be able to do. But the good part is we go to the gym. It's in Princeton. It's a white gym, so I'm with him. He benches like 400 and something. And so we go over to part, and all the other people would go to the other side. They don't want to be near Boris. So this is great, man. You got to come every week. We got like the whole half of the gym to ourselves.
Oh, man. It's amazing. It is amazing. It's always good seeing you, Chris.
All right, good to see you. All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Okay, bye.
Bye.